Om Sarvadharmastapakastvam Sarvadharmaswarapakaha Acharyanam Mahacharyo Ramakrishnaya Te Namaha Yathagnir Dihika Shakti Ramakrishna Stitihiya Sarva Vidya Swarupam Tam Sharadam Pranamamyam Paratatve Sadalino Ramakrishna Samagana Yodharma Asta Paraparo Virisham Tanamamyaham Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. We salute those three great beings who are the truth of life and existence. And who destroy the sufferings of the devotees. May they be pleased to accept our offerings and grant us pure love, pure knowledge, and pure devotion. Our salutations to Swami Vivekananda, who, though ever immersed in non-dual samadhi, has nevertheless come to this world to help all suffering beings at the behest of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. May his blessings be upon us eternally. Om, peace, peace, peace. Peace be unto us, peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. And with those powerful words from the Ramakrishna order tradition, written by the Guru of my Guru, Swami Shardananda, in a song with several other verses to Swami Brahmananda and to all the 16 direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, we have a start to this third class on the powerful subject of the will to live a spiritual life. We took a break last week, a weekend, as you know. So 3 Sundays ago we started this series, and then last weekend we had this seminar on a very related topic called How the Householder Renounces the World. And that's a very worthy topic to take up in accord with this subject of the will to live a spiritual life. And we know that all of this has been proceeding from the teachings of Adi Shankaracharya, who lived about 700 AD, and his guru was the incarnation of the father of yoga, who was named Govindapad at that time, Patanjali prior. And then his guru's guru was Gaudapada, the great advaitan. So we have this combination of Advaita Vedanta, yoga, and then the Neo-Vedanta that was coming through at the time. All at the time when Buddhism had sort of had its heyday, because that was 1,000 years past when Lord Buddha had been born. And so it's a very interesting time in India, and storing up the spiritual energy that some, what would it be, maybe 1,200 years later, Swami Vivekananda would bring to the West in the form of Vedanta that is now here amongst us since 1893, when he attended the Parliament of Religions and made such a big stir. And this was all, of course, prior to any real authoritative being coming, although there were a few Zen Buddhist Roshis also coming from Japan at that time to the West, because India's Sanatana Dharma had marched the other direction around the world too, and gone through Tibet and Burma and Ceylon and China, and finally, after many generations, had reached Japan. So then there was this direct route that Swamiji took through Alaska and across the north of Canada, the northern United States and Canada, arriving in Chicago for this great Parliament of Religions, all sort of unannounced. It's part of our history. So we know that these great beings have come amongst us to encourage us about this very important facet, the will to live a spiritual life. And since these classes are about an hour and a half, we we should push on, because I intend to finish this topic next week on Sunday's class. So if you've been with me for 2 Sundays, stay tuned for this class for an hour and a half, and then next Sunday's class we'll finish up this chart that we're looking at right now. And let's look at what we've accomplished so far briefly. There you can see that the images of course, the book that we just released called Footfalls of the Indian Rishis, in which some 300 charts are included. This isn't one of them. This is one of the later ones, but it shows us that same image in the back of footfalls going up to the mountaintop of the Himalayas. So using that for a backdrop, I put these 8 strata of spiritual attainment out of the Viveka Chudamani of Shankara next to the 8 limbs of yoga on the other side. It'd also be nice to put the Eightfold Path of Buddha next to those and look at some other Eightfold systems to see how India's darshanas have followed one another, concurred with one another. They've never argued their philosophy or made argumentation the point of philosophy. It's always been existence is. Now let's see how it manifests itself in different ages through different forms. Some of those forms, of course, called avatars, or great realized souls, and then many other souls in India that weren't of the greatness of stature of an avatar, but were still nevertheless illumined, who had reached what they call moksha, or mukti, or kaivalya in terms of Patanjali's system. Shankara favored that word moksha and mukti. So there you see, we started 3 Sundays ago then, in this month of Sundays series, with the need for a human birth, and put that across the board with coming with these 5 yamas. Must be non-violent, must be moderate in your appetites, must not covet the goods of others, like the world is so guilty of right now, different nations running to take the goods of others and resources. So this is all based upon India's ancient philosophy of how to live dharmically and to stay clear of that adharmic way of thinking that is taken up by beings who are worldly or confused or even evil-minded. So from a human birth, we marched on to strength of body. So it's pretty clear what they're saying here. A human birth is going to be necessary to gain this will to live a spiritual life, which is eventually going to take you to the experience of samadhi, which we'll look at briefly in the Father of Yoga's view today, and then onwards towards realization of the Atman, we call it in Vedanta, and how that Atman is one with Brahman. So human bodies, human birth, strength of body, and then we looked at, and each of these we're taking up with a few charts over the last Sundays, fundamental purity of mind, or we call that chit shuddhi. And we put that across from the board from how to control the life force so that the prana is flowing, how to breathe properly, and how to sit properly. All of these are, of course, inferred in the 8-limbed yoga, and they're not obsessed with in the 8-limbed yoga either. There's just a few sutras on each of these, unlike in the Hatha Yoga that stops and dallies with these many asanas, and sometimes the conventional view of Kundalini Yoga, which has you doing too many breathing exercises, which can imbalance the mind. So when you look at Father of Yoga's 8-limbed yoga, it's very, very steady and very inward and very direct. That's why we're putting it across the board with Vedanta here. Father of Vedanta, Father of Yoga, Vedavasa, and Patanjali. We looked at that, and then we arrived last week, or a week before last, sorry, at the will to live a spiritual life, and looked at the 5th strata called comprehension of the scriptures. Remember, the scriptures are eternal. The scriptures fall into 3 levels. That is Advaita, Vishishta Advaita, and Dvaita. The scriptures are realized by manana, shravana, hearing the teacher say it, manana, rolling it over in your mind, questioning, and then nididhyasana, getting corroboration via your own practice with the scriptures. That's why the will to live a spiritual life is going to be important there. It says, like a quote from Vivekananda, I just read this yesterday, he said, "Let everyone know what has happened to you by reading the scriptures and by what I've told you." It was a direct sentence by him. So he said, "You're of a different cut. I like to speak to men like you. Make sure that you let everyone know what has happened to you by reading the scriptures and by the advice I've given you and the teachings." So he was one that wanted to bring Vedanta, which was quite ancient all the way back to the Vedic times, out of the closet, out of the church, out of even the narrow mind or the philosophical mind, and make it practical and livable right here. This would be the quickest way to have the transformation of human mind that we were just looking at here in terms of purity of mind, swiftly available to us, that we would hold a different perspective about who we are and how quickly we can do away with ignorance, which in this tradition is not real. It's like darkness in a cave that goes away as soon as you light the torch. So we looked at comprehension of the scriptures, and that brought us to this acquisition of discrimination. Now, I'm going to show you several charts on that because I'm going to move through that fairly quickly. But before I do, I want you to look at the top of this chart. That is our main study chart. We're going to go through this next week, but I want to familiarize you with it now. I'll take 2 or 3 charts that are going to illustrate all 10 of these points, but this will at least make the study of this main chart comprehensive for us. So the way I've been put it up there is there are challenges to master in order to live a will of get the will to live a spiritual life. So we're here at the red line again. There are challenges that we're going to have to be mastered in this day and age, and there are victories to gain in order to gain the will to live a spiritual life. Let's look at the challenges. I'm just going to pretty much list them down for you so you're familiarized with them. In this day and age particularly, and Swamiji brought out a lot of this in his letters and his teachings, you have to triumph over personal laziness. I remember a quote of Lord Buddha from the Dhammapada where he says, slothfulness is the rust of the watchmen at the city gate, leading to calamity. And then he said, lack of recitation of the scriptures is the rust of monasteries, and lack of spiritual practice is the rust of householders or households. So he put this out in one of the verses of the Dhammapada. They heard him say this and wrote it down, the arhats in that time. So this is apropos here to this need for us to triumph over personal laziness. It's not just, oh, I think I'll give up that bad habit. We're actually going to get victory, triumph over slothfulness, over laziness of all kinds, physical, vital, our energy, and mental. And then hopefully that will lead to triumph over intellectual laziness and philosophical laziness, because these are different levels of our being. Along the way, I would think that also triumph over emotional laziness would also, that is not purifying the emotions and the senses, would also be included in that triumph. So it's a very important one. I'll have more to say about that next week. Now, resist worldly family influences. There's a great difference between spiritual life and earthly life. Then there's another vast difference between earthly life and worldly life. And then there's another vast difference between worldly life and adharmic or evil life. So these have a part of the discrimination that we're going to look at next when we get back to it. So this is where we're going with this. Will to live a spiritual life as corroborated by learning the scriptures, which was across the board to transcending attachments, and then getting to this acquisition of Viveka, or how to discriminate between the changing and the unchanging, or the real and the unreal. So resist worldly family influences. Worldliness, what's the difference between worldliness and worldly life and earthly life? Earthly life still follows religion, worldly life doesn't, basically. So if you have religion, albeit conventional, then you've got a compass, you've got a guide with the head of the religion, with the Ishtam we call it in our tradition. But when worldliness sets in, then those are abandoned, and pretty much, as we say in Vedanta, just pretty much worshiping your own ego. My teacher used to say that in his talks too. He says, people, it's very fundamentalist and dualistic here, he found in the West, because people think that there's some God inside, and then he would clarify and say, there's no God there, that's your ego you're worshiping. So he would make us take a deeper look at this reality that we were doing mere lip service to by calling it God. They had many words for that. Divine reality, Shiva, Paramashiva, Brahman, and of course many words for the state in which you are when you reach that and merge into it, as Shankara said, like a hailstone into an ocean. So we must probably part company with the worldly family influences in order to get out of this, get some detachment from this and move backwards to it. I've not come to bring peace to the world, I've come to bring a sword. Who am I quoting? I'm quoting Jesus. We'll look at that sword in a minute. I've not come to bring peace to the world. They tried to call him a peacemaker. I've come to bring a sword, and with that sword I will separate father from son, mother from daughter, mother-in-law from daughter-in-law. I was thinking just the other day when I look at families, I was thinking not enough to go around was the phrase that came to my mind. Divine Mother usually puts one spiritual person in every family, but some families don't have any, so there must not be quite enough of us to go around, you see. And so those ones that are in worldly families or even earthly families, they're going to have to step forward and tell these beings that I'm messing with family here. And get bumper stickers around there say, don't mess with family, you see. But those beings you're talking about, from Buddha to Christ and onward, have messed with families very directly and separated the wheat from the chaff and directed those who are ready for realization away from conventional means. So this ought to be known, or should be not misunderstood to mean that, oh, that's not Christianity you're talking about. Family's important. Dharmic family's important. The other family is a downright degradation of the Dharmic family if they're not following the Dharma. And where do we find Dharmic families? According to Buddha, not in those households that don't study the scriptures, not in those monasteries that don't recite the scriptures. So everyone who is in knowledge of the problems of developing a will to live a spiritual life, because there are so few people in the world right now who have that ability, who can flex their muscles to say, I have a spiritual life. Some of them can say, I have a religious life, and then again, we're defaulting back to earthly and worldly lives as well. So very important. I'll have more to say about that with a chart next week. Resist worldly family influences. You have a right to do that. Sri Ramakrishna said that if your father and mother are pointing the way towards Brahman, towards God, then you should worship them like gods and goddesses. If not, you have a right to leave them. You see? So you can come back for them later. That's what Lord Buddha did. That's what Jesus did. They all got out of the mix. Then they found the path that the world was supposed to take, went back at that time and introduced their families to it again. If you're part of the problem, then you can't be a part of the solution. So you have to detach. It's a very important lesson. Stand firm against conventions, then, would be a connected way. We want fresh, new expressions of Vedanta. That's actually what Vedanta is. It's fresh, new dispensation of old religion. I've not come to tear down the laws of the ancients. I've come to resurrect them. You see, so you take the best of old religion and which was what Shankara was doing with all of the good that Buddhism had brought to the world since 550 BC up to his time in 700 AD. He was bringing forth all the good things that Buddhism had brought, mostly on the non-dual level, mostly in terms of meditation. So to stand firm against these conventions would be to make sure the spring is always pure, the wellspring is always bubbling up pure with these great messages of souls like Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. I think I mentioned that, maybe it was at satsang yesterday, that 5 million people have recognized Sri Ramakrishna in the world, but there are 7-point-some billion people here, so many more have to recognize him, and many of these are in India. They haven't even recognized the return of their own avatar. So this is how you pay it forward. You bring things current, and you stand up against old convention. It doesn't just mean family convention, it means religious convention too. Anything that's a superstition that's getting in the way, then you have a right to call it out and put it down, and pick up this fresh dispensation as it's being given each age. Each age probably here would mean, every few centuries. They say you can look back to the great souls and find maybe 500 years between each of them. So a great soul is going to be on the scene like a great ocean liner that leaves the harbor once every 500 years. Finally, maintain the pace of practice. This means that, I have a will to live a spiritual life. Oops, it fell away. I don't have that will anymore. I'm not growing. I'm not intensifying. Confusion came. I need more clarity. I need to keep up this practice day to day, month to month, year to year, and yes, lifetime to lifetime, if you look deeply into that. And then turn wealth towards spiritual growth. It's being given to all too many frivolous things. But of course, frivolous things are one thing, but war, that's not even acceptable. You don't spend money to kill people. What's the matter with you? And so you do away with the militaries, and you make them serve other nations. That's what an army is. I used to talk to people in the army about that. They say, yeah, we don't think of the army as a way of controlling other nations and killing people. We want to go there and help them. So there are people who are holding the right perspective about that, which would be dharma for a warrior. So it's not like we're calling down all war and calling down all violence, because this is the world you're talking about. Things die in the interim of everything that lives. So it's just to take this spiritual growth and draw back Mother Lakshmi's wealth from frittering it away on things that do not contribute to spiritual growth, which means what? They contribute to personal laziness. You see how it connects back. Things that contribute to your personal laziness, too much goods, too much pleasures, too much food, too much whatever. Those things are where you withdraw Mother Lakshmi's energy and put it on these things that are going to help people and help yourself. That was a quick run through. We'll look at a couple of charts around that next week. Let's look at the victories that you gain in the will to live a spiritual life. Worship daily with devotion. I know so many people personally, some of them here in the West, that I've encouraged to do that. And also in India, where I went there and just saw people already in the midst of doing their daily devotions. They wouldn't think of not doing their puja to Shiva every day or once a week, and doing worship of ancestors, doing worship of humankind, doing worship of the great teachers, Rishi Yagya it's called, doing worship of the gods and goddesses like Lakshmi and others. I wouldn't think of dropping that for a moment, because that's what the whole dharmic harmony is based upon, and everyone needs their due in that. So worship daily with devotion is an important, I hate to even call it a duty, but if you want to look at it as a duty, that's good. A lot of people think of it as a sweet privilege. Study the scriptures intelligently, which means probably, like we said back here, you're going to want to comprehend what the scriptures are. Find a teacher who can relate them to you. Then serve and question the Guru. Service is called Mahatseva. If you were at the seminar last weekend, you saw that chart on the 7 great ideals. Sapta, Alaya, Vijnana. The 7 great ideals. One of those was Mahaseva. You worship the great ones. You serve them. And question the Guru means, in our tradition, Atma Vichara. You question him about what? What's my true nature? What's my connection with reality? And what's that over there? Called Maya. You see? Just look at that from a distance. Or maybe, put your attention, keep your thoughts on thoughts of reality alone. Just think about Brahman, that will disappear. That's fog. So serve and question the Guru. Support and inspire the Sangha. One of the great downfalls of spiritual families in this day and age is people seeing other people take a vow and leave it. It's called vrata. So I vow to take initiation, to practice this mantra, to follow the advice of my Guru. And then, as Vivekananda said, the next day you can't smell a whiff of them. They're gone. What happened to them? They're supposed to be serving, they're supposed to be worshiping, they're supposed to be an example to others in their Sangha in order for the Sangha to succeed in spiritual life. Just ask anyone who's tried to start a Sangha, particularly in America, what the troubles of that are and what the problems are with it. So support that and then inspire them, contribute, participate. What other words can you call forth in English that can show how important it is to keep that spiritual family alive once you've even found a few people who are interested in it? Very important, that cohesiveness. And finally, adhere to the non-dual perspective. For that, I'll show a chart next week to you about the 7 qualifications of a tantric aspirant. I think I may end this series with that chart because one of those, and it might be surprise some people who think of Tantra as just ritual or worship, that the tantric aspirant is supposed to hold this non-dual perspective. It's called advaitahina in that tradition. So that's a very important part of it, that you keep worship of God, deities, rituals, offering flowers, incense, candles, worshiping Shiva and Shakti. All of those things are important, all based on a non-dual perspective. That no matter what I see here, I'm seeing that there is a oneness, a cohesive backdrop to everything. No matter how, if it appears 2 like Shiva and Shakti, or if it appears many like Brahman and Maya, nonetheless there's a cohesive unity behind it all. So I've gone through all of those for you, and we'll take those up with a few charts to finish next week. So that's a little review, a precursor to what's going to happen. Let's now go back to this discrimination, which is so important because Swami Vivekananda named himself after it. He first started off in India before he came to the Parliament of Religions, and so his name, calling himself Satchidananda. He actually started off first calling himself Ramakrishnananda, but his brother monk liked that name, so he let him have it. Then wandering around, he started calling himself Swami Satchidananda, existence, knowledge, and bliss, absolute. And then before he came west, I think he probably gave it some thought and said, well, we've heard about the Westerners, we know how rajasic they are, we know that they're into building warships right now, because at that time England was powerful and was even beginning to invade India in a warlike way. So he was thinking about it. He says, well, what they really need here is to know the difference, the distinction between what is real and what is constantly changing. So this world is just, if you took this world as one particle, it's constantly changing like an atom. The world itself is like an atom amidst atoms in space. So everything is constantly shifting all the time with no solid ground, what Jesus called shifting sands, and you don't build your house on that. Your house means a structure that you can worship in, not the house that birds have nests and foxes have holes in, but this house of the spirit he was talking about. My father's mansion has many rooms in it, kind of spiritual house. So in that way, you're going to want to separate the wheat from the chaff. Another word in English is discern the difference between what remains the same and what changes. Because if you know that difference, you can detach from what changes and put your attention on that which is real. And you'll find out how many things that you're thinking are important are not at all important. They're just shifting all the time. And it's confusing your mind, along with three gunas that are constantly in there, that are making you see things differently each day, and you're buying into it. You're buying into these changes when you should have this stability based on the will to live a spiritual life, to see the reality as unchanging, with a capital U. So let's look at this chart first, because when I thought of discrimination, there were 4 or 5 different charts I could present, but I thought it would be really nice if people just knew how a Vedantist, and I would say probably how someone who's following yoga or Samkhya or even Tantra would look at this difference between the real and the unreal. So here's a teaching about Triloka, and I was also going to bring the 3 worlds in Zen Buddhism. It's called Sangai. So you can know that from India's beginnings back here, when they were thinking of 3 worlds, Bur, Bhuva, Swaha, that some 52 generations or more later, when Buddhism had marched across the world and arrived in Japan from China, that they were thinking about 3 worlds now. You see, oh, there's the outside, there's the inside, and there's the transcendent. Different designations for this Triloka, 3 worlds. It's very important for them to know that, because then if they saw that there was a distinction between the inner and the outer, they could more readily practice withdrawing from the outer. Well, let's try putting that away for a while. It's gone in deep sleep anyway. Well, I meditated it away the other day. Or I had samadhi, where did it go? You see. So they started thinking this way, like the ancient rishis of India, and they began to lift off of this obsession with the waking state as being the only reality, and with objects being the only pursuit. And so that way you can see some of these systems that I've put under these 3 worlds: immanent, transcendent, and absolute. That's called Stula Jagat, Sukshma Jagat, and Karna Jagat. Pardon me for the Karna Jagat being under the absolute category, but we're talking about something that's beyond the inner and the outer here. But it's not necessarily formless and non-dual. So you see the 3 realms there: Adibhuta, Adidaiva, and Adiyatma. You go back to the Gita for that. There's the world of living beings, there's a world of celestial beings. That's a grand category because it includes munis and siddhas and gandharvas and angels and other celestial beings. Ancestors too should fall into that category, the departed ancestors. And then Adhyatma, non-duality itself, where forms and names begin to dissolve into the ocean of consciousness like icebergs under the sun. Then there's this 4 states of awareness: waking, dreaming, deep sleep, and pure awareness. It's not the only teaching. Sometimes I come across people who just have heard this one teaching and they're really excited about it, so that's all they talk about. But other times I'll see that it's just very important for the individual to know that they have 3 worlds within them, 3 states of awareness, and there's a 4th beyond those 3. That's why I'm referring to the absolute as being more still in the realm of cause and effect. That's what that word means, karna, cause and effect. So there you see them. Worldliness, yeah, that would definitely be true, but wakefulness under the physical world. Under the psychological world, we have dream state and deep sleep. That's called svapna and sushupti. These are important Sanskrit words: jagrat, svapna, and sushupti. And then you have a word that just means the fourth. Like Lord Buddha later, they didn't really want to confuse anyone. So they just, let's not give it a big fancy name like Satchidananda or something. Let's just call it the fourth. Because it's very hard to put your finger on that if you can at all. Like you can on waking and dreaming. Deep sleep is hard enough to indicate. I've just been in deep sleep. How do you know? Because I disappeared, you see. So that's a question you'd want to ask, back to the important questions we were just talking about. But when it comes to Turiya, that's not the emptiness of deep sleep. That's bliss and peace that passes all understanding. And they come out knowing about that when they see it. And I think many souls, even though they might cover that during their lives, they have a sort of goal inside their head. That's where I'm going back to when I die. I'm going to the light. So maybe they don't like religion, they don't like philosophy, they're not necessarily attached to ritualistic worship. Maybe they don't even like philosophy, but they have some sort of ideal in their mind saying, that light am I. I am that light. None else exists. That's where I'm headed. That's where I came from. So they have this beautiful idea of the wellspring and the destination with the river flowing in between the two. Going through these rather quickly because basically these are coming under what heading? Discrimination. If you know this, you can base your Viveka upon this and reach this strata of enlightenment. See, this strata of spiritual attainment. It's one of the things that's going to have to be attained, and many people haven't. They're still confused about it. So this is why we're putting these things, designations together. There are also three cosmic functions. Basically, we call that Brahman and Vishnu, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, as in Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwara, Gurur Eva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. In other words, those three cosmic functions of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Projectionism, sustenance, and withdrawal. I put under there in my own fashion, apparent creation, assumed preservation, and supposed destruction, because none of those happen. There's nevertheless three gods which are putting them out playfully at the cosmic level, and then they will filter down into these other worlds and become dreamlike, and then they'll become solid, and that'll be a waking state. And when you give up the body-mind mechanism, the fourfold mind that's doing the projecting under the auspice of these three, then you'll return to formlessness again. Or when you have a very high meditation, you'll feel the bliss that is there and the peace that passes all understanding, and know that there is a reality behind name and form, beyond time and space, and free of cause and effect. Isn't that nice? See? Isn't that special? So let's look at then the Eightfold body under this designation. The physical body falls under the physical world, of course. The ego, mind, intellect, five senses of action, and / knowledge fall under the psychological world. And the Atman, or sometimes we would say in Kundalini Shakti, falls under the spiritual world. This is because there were different systems of counting the tattvas. It's a very important word in Vedanta. Tattva, a principle. But these aren't sentient necessarily, unless you maybe capitalized a P. But there are principles that are insentient that come out of nature, and laws like time and space that are also insentient, that are operated by higher beings like gods and so forth. But these are called tattvas. So like, say, in Krishna's time, he would talk about an eightfold body. That's why I used it here. But before that, there was a 24 cosmic principles. After that, there was a 36 skandhas in Shaivism, where they started to tally all these things and make the philosophy a lot fuller and richer, and cause all of the gray areas to disappear in a great thinker's mind. Wow, that's great. I see that's a revelation now. Before it was just my intellectual knowledge. Now it's a revelation. I see it. It's not clear as mud anymore. It's like a diamond. The 24 cosmic principles, well, I just mentioned them. 5 gross, 5 active senses. Active here means, of course, cognitive. 5 subtle elements, 5 cognitive senses, and mind, buddhi, ego, and mahat fall under the second world. Remember, when we're talking about triloka, which is a way of discriminating. So keep these connections going. Come on, dance with me, follow along. It'll be fine. You'll reach the right conclusion here. And then Purusha Prakriti, of course, falling under this more transcendental heading. That is Purusha and everything that's in an unmanifested nature coming out at the behest of the Purusha and manifesting itself in these 3 worlds. So it all starts out from a detached witness consciousness place, and then flows down into a, well, I think I'll get more involved place and begin dreaming this, begin playing with it. Dream, lila, play, sport, and then finally I think I'll solidify it down to the nth degree, and I'll see what the air, earth, fire, water, and ether look like when they get solid. It's a nice way of putting it, actually. In your dreams, they're not solid. Liquid is double liquid. Earth is liquid. Water, air is liquid. You see what I mean? It's just all formless. So that's where your thoughts have given rise to the 5 elements out here. And when you go to sleep, these out here go back. And the Tibetans have told us that when you pass from the body, you take these back one at a time. Ether, air, fire, water, earth, probably in the other order, back into yourself, into Prakriti that's in yourself. Because the self is not going to want them. I don't want those. I never wanted them in the first place. I always wanted to remain free. Then I got strapped with 5 of this, 5 of that, 5 of this, 24 of this, 36 of that. I don't want that anymore. So I'm going to take it back to where? Back to Prakriti, nature, which is inside the great mind, being overseen by Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Then there's the 5 sheaths, famous Vedantic teaching. So Annamaya Kosha falls in the first world, and all 4 of the other sheaths fall in the second world. Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, Anandamaya. Only Brahman is without worlds. It's beyond worlds in this system. Then the 7 planes of existence are another way to discriminate this matter. And we know them all. Well, at least we know 3 of them. Om, Bhur, Bhuva, Swaha, as we say in the Gayatri. So Bhurloka is the earth plane. Then Bhuvar, Swarloka are the astral and heavenly planes. Maharloka, the plane of the rishis. The Janaloka, plane of the firstborn beings. Taparloka, plane of the Vairajas, or the ascetics, ready to do without anything. And the Satyaloka, the plane of Lord Brahma, which is the first of all worlds that the soul would visit, and probably the last of all worlds where it would depart through the gateway to formlessness is that realm of the Trinity, or Brahma Loka. So you can see how lokas 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 are all falling into the category of the second world. Those are all back inside of you. They have name and form, no matter how subtle that might get. And through that, then the gateway to Brahman opens, to non-duality, called the 7 planes of existence. So then there's the 7 states of mind. Those are chakras. Muladhara, Svadhisthana, and Manipura all fall in the earth plane, so to speak. Anahata, Vishuddha, Agya, and chakras all fall in the psychological world, or the second world. And Sahasrara-chakra is, of course, transcendent of all of them. So most people know about their root center, the center at the organs of evacuation and sexuality and generation, and then the center at the navel, which is all about rebirth and passing from this world into the next two worlds. So those three worlds are their own designation that you can pull out and study on their own merit. So hope that wasn't too complex, but it's a good way of describing what Viveka is, and so that those of you who are looking on or will look on in the future to this will see that, oh, I see what these people, these Vedantists and many of these other practitioners of Eastern religion are thinking about when they say the difference between the real and the unreal. If there's any modicum of change in it in any way, then they're designating it with these two worlds. This third world is transcendent and absolute. And that's what Buddha called nirvana. And that's the peace that passes all understanding. And that's nirvana to the Buddha and so forth. Asampragyata to the father of yoga, and nirikalpa to the Vedantas, to the Advaita Vedantas. Now, so that we put a finer point on discrimination and move right along here, let's look at the great sword of discrimination. Slokas 147 and 148, for those of you who are going to go running to the scriptures, because you want to comprehend them, to understand what discrimination is. Who could put it better than this great Shiva avatar and Advaita Vedantist and worshipper of the Divine Mother and student of the great Gaudapada? Who could put it better than him? So he says in the slokas, these two slokas, he talks about the blade of the sword, the effect of the sword, the power of the sword, the edge of the sword, the sanctity of the sword, and the hilt of the sword, all put out here in a diagram nicely for us to look at. I went through and assigned them to these and then found certain quotes by each of these great souls who all are very well informed about hefting this sword of discrimination. You have to have strong strength of body to do that, and purity of mind, and the will to live a spiritual life. So this sword will cut away all the things that other people are complaining about endlessly and not doing anything about. That is, i.e., they're not trying to live a spiritual life. They're content with the earth plane. If we go back and look at what that is, you can look down the left-hand column of the three worlds and see the things that people are limited to in their life. We just talked about that, earthly life, worldly life. But these great souls are not content with that. Why should they be? So Shankaracharya says, only the great sword of discrimination can cut down the tree of samsara. And that sword should be whetted by the grace of the Lord. So a beautiful putting together this atmagyan, this knowledge of the self, by cutting away the ignorance, avidya, in order to, and at the same time, making sure that that sword is whetted well with the stone, whetting stone, of grace of the Lord. All three of those put together are like three great yogas. And then heft that sword and let it have its effect. So there's the blade of the sword, Lord Buddha says, and if you follow along, you'll find out that this is the Eightfold Path of Buddhism put in a few words. A well-informed view, knowledge of non-dual nature of existence, a well-intentioned resolve, mature renunciation, goodwill towards all beings, and the desire not to harm, non-caustic speech, refraining from lying, gossip, and slander, wise conduct in conformity with morality, right livelihood, selfless but meticulous effort, support of dharma and avoidance of adharma, mindfulness and sensitivity in thought, word, and deed, a refined concentration, all of this is called true dharma. So, in order to find a good definition from dharma, we'd have to go back 550 years before Jesus in India to see how Buddha put forward what he called the Eightfold Path, Ashtangika Marga. And then 1,000 years later, Ashtangika is coming out to us as Ashtanga Yoga. In Patanjali, you see, Patanjali was influenced by Lord Buddha. Why not? Because they were both Indian rishis, so to speak. Let's go down the left-hand column to say the sanctity of the sword. That's the grace of the Lord that he was just talking about. His Sankara's teacher's teacher, the great non-dualist Gaudapada, says, absolute consciousness, which Upanishadic sages call Brahman, is by its very nature as grace free from the subtle anxiety that is always felt by any separate experiencer. Oh, this is where you're getting into Gaudapada's Karika on the Mandukya Upanishad, and he starts coming forth with these jewels like this. This jewel is set amidst a bunch of other great teachings, but even taken by itself, you can see that the finger is being pointed to this ego, this separate experiencer who does not have the will to live a spiritual life yet, is always afraid of everything that it's going to encounter. The Bhartrihari's verses on renunciation that we read last week at the seminar comes to mind. That one verse where he says, the beautiful fear disfigurement, politicians fear slander, the rich fear robbers, the learned fear competition. I mean, he goes on with this beautiful sloka, which is one of 108 or so, talking about this fear that a separate experiencer encounters every time he goes out of the house. But you see here, grace of the Lord is his or her power. You see, the name that they take out with them saves you from the fear of being a separate experiencer, because you've surrendered the lower self to the higher self. Om Tach Nayo Ravrinni Mehe, right? Gatung Yagyaya Gatum Yenu Bhattai. Let's make an offering right away of the small self into the great self. And let's revere all the Lord and Mother of the sacrifice as we do it. And always rejoice in this sacrifice. So they have a very positive mind about it, but there's no doubt as to why or when it has to be done. Why? Because the separate experiencer is not real. It's part of the ego package we just looked at back here that falls in the first world and then in a modified version in the second world. And then it's also in fear and in doubt about everything that's coming its way. It's not in control. So Sri Ramakrishna said, when sunrises and sunsets, those are the two times when man should meditate, because he will realize at those times that he's not in control of anything. He doesn't make the sunrise, he doesn't make the sunset. There must be other powers involved, not just physical ones as well. But if he knows this, then his ego will get a teaching, you see, and it will shrink, and then when it shrinks, you'll see behind it this great light, and when it expands, that light goes away. So the expansion and diminution of the ego is very important in spiritual life. Hilt of the sword is the foundational faith in the scriptures. Lord Vashishta says, study of scriptures without a guru for mere intellectual knowledge alone, like in the West I would say, will only lead to agyan, ignorance, because the ego will get a hold of that and it'll call it my knowledge. But Sri Ramakrishna said, she sits in my throat, the Mother of Wisdom, and talks continually. I just open my mouth and she pushes out all this wisdom. I know nothing about it. It's not mine. It all belongs to her. So the ego has been effaced there, removed, and at least ripened, so that that great light can express itself through us. Let's take the second entry on the right-hand side. The power of the sword, discriminative wisdom, is that eye of non-dual wisdom that you see there on the sword. Sri Krishna says, to those who love me and are devoted to me, I give them the power of discrimination by which they can come to me. Yeah. Utkramantam stiti vyapi bunjanam, he says in the Gita. Ajnana chakshu. He says, most people don't see me as I come and go in and out of bodies, in and out of worlds. They don't see me. That's why he says ajnana. They're in a state of ajnana. But those see who have opened the eye of wisdom. Jnana chakshu. So that's mentioned in, as I've often said, 7 different religious traditions of the world I've studied. I've found the third eye mentioned in 7 of them. How about the edge of the sword, purification of mind? The father of yoga tells us, past impressions create for the aspirant an assumed reality such as a physical and mental illness until the force of new impressions from samadhi burn these out. So you're telling yourself, I'm getting sick, I'm sick, I'll never recover, and so forth. But then your mind changes and starts saying, I'm getting over it, I feel better. So these are new impressions that are burning out the thoughts in your mind that you were ever sick to begin with. Hopefully that will lead to the fact that the Atman never gets sick. So you'll be able to bear with the body's illnesses, as Sri Ramakrishna did even with cancer in the throat, and not even feel it, as it were, and keep your mind on thoughts on reality alone. He continues, through purificatory practices such as japam, the seeker ceases to react to physical illness and becomes impervious to depression and the emotional states it causes. So beautiful that it would transcend the physical problems, transcend the emotional problems, and also the mental problems, depression. See, all 3 of those are included in this great healer, if you want to call him that. Because we started out with Lord Vashishta, or we took recourse to Lord Vashishta's teachings down there, and across the board. That's why I put Lord Patanjali, because these were the 2 great healers of India on all levels, not just the physical. The final thing to look at in this chart, till we understand this is the great sword that we want to heft and apply, that's going to give us direct perception of Atman. It's going to cut away everything that is the, how to put it, the changing real. Because everything that's the unreal has been cut away by now. But by the time you can lift this sword and heft it, then you're talking about very subtle things you're going to have to cut away in order to have that vision of non-duality. So let's look at the effect of all this. The Muni Kapila is very qualified to speak about this. He says, with the full expansion of knowledge arising from the elimination of all attachments and the transcendence of dualities, the self abandons all identification with nature and knows itself as the reality. All the way back in the Muni Kapula's time, if he can be the earliest representative of one of the greatest souls that lived in India for all times, gave us the 24 cosmic principles and told us about the gunas, such important teachings like that, then we can look back to him to see how advanced he was in his thinking, to know that Prakriti had all come out of the mind, all come out of the self. And tried to teach that. It stuck in India for long periods of time. Other great souls came to bring it back again and again, so India never forgot that all of this is just an expression of the mind. And all of this is in Brahman. So the few distinctions that were called non-dual got refined in that light. Pretty soon you know you couldn't call Brahman a form or a name or have it caught in time and space. Yet name, form, and time and space were somehow all in it. So that's why Swamiji said, you know, where's the time that the soul will come and go when all of time is in the soul? Where's the space that the soul will come and go from when all of space is in the soul? So you have to turn this all back in as coming out from little old you. You're in control of all this. And if you've discriminated to know where the whole cosmic process is coming from, we look back on the three locus chart, if you know teachings like that, you'll never be in doubt again of where all of this is originating. It's originating in your mind, and you have an on and off switch now for the mind, and your finger can operate that switch. Not some god, not some devil, not some ancestors. No one else can do that. That's up to you. In fact, you should probably give that to the gods and to the ancestors. That's what Prajapati does. He's the teacher of gods, who's a human being. So we are actually blazing through these charts on discrimination, and I wonder, possibly I brought another one for you. Let's see. Yeah, this one. Let's take a look at this, because it very rarely gets shown. This all comes from the yogic perspective of Patanjali. So you can see here, I even gave it the Vedantic yogic combination title of Viveka, Vairagya, Abhyasa, and Sthiti. So we know Viveka is the discrimination between the real and the unreal. Vairagya is the detachment from the unreal once you've made the discrimination. Abhyasa is the constancy of it all. That's where you get the will to live a spiritual life. Abhyasa yoga means the yoga of constant practice. And then sthiti is steadiness. So you can see how beautiful if you put those together. I have discriminated, I have detached, I am steady now in that condition, I'm practicing that condition now, and I'm steady in the practice. Doesn't it really just clarify and put accents on all these upper strata that we're talking about here? Vedavyasa, father of Vedanta, says about this, because this chart is based, that's why I found this outlet. You see this two bodies of water on either side of it, and gave it the title Cosmic Pragbara. The other side is called Kaivalya Pragbara. This side of the outlet is called the Samsara Pragbara. So you can see that it's all based upon, again, back to Lord Kapila, his teaching of there is a river of soul that is going towards samsara all the time. And there's a river of souls that are going towards liberation at all times. So which one do I want to get in? So, and in the middle there's this, everything that I just talked about in the three locus chart is this cosmic pragbara, like the Trinity, holding the ground between the two. And so it's very unlikely that one soul is going to get out of samsara and cross this body of land and get into the ocean of pragbara to get free. But that's how the Muni Kapila, the great soul Kapila, talked about it. So he was the first to give us this grand look at rivers of souls. Pragbara actually means a dam, so you're going to have to extend your understanding a little bit in that direction to say, basically, this tendency of souls to get out of the body and get free, it's not so easy as it sounds. There's a dam there, and that's redirecting the waters of souls into another ocean called samsara sagara. Samsara means constant rebirth and ignorance in cycles. Lord Buddha called it the Kala Chakra, so it's been really ancient in India. This fact, and it's one of the things they're trying to comprehend and heal, is why do you want to keep going back towards the same old bondage again? Why do you want to keep coming back to the earth in ignorance? Why do you want to keep coming back thinking that you're a body when you're a soul? Why? Until finally they started asking who, and the things got better. But it's also good to put the optimistic side into this, that there is a natural river of freedom flowing to the ocean of Kaivalya. So that was one of the first words for divine reality. The father of yoga, thousands of years later, picked it up from the Muni Copula and used it. Kaivalya was separation from nature. So he called that the penultimate station before absolute formlessness, was you would have to separate yourself from nature. And we just talked about nature being in you. So when you come to a high position in this will to live a spiritual life, all of a sudden you say, thine only is the hand that holds the rope that drags thee on. That came up yesterday at satsang. Somebody recited that. And maybe I failed to mention it, why I opened up with chants on Sri Ramakrishna and Swami Vivekananda, and why I sang about Swami Vivekananda too, is that this is his Mahasamadhi day tomorrow. So this is the 3rd of July, isn't it? So tomorrow's the 4th. And so this is the weekend that we usually have a retreat or some big celebration of the Mahasamadhi, the great exit of this great soul into absolute reality, Mahanirvana, Asampragyata, or Kaivalya. So that's why we always think of Swamiji on the 4th of July, where he passed away. It has a double significance for people who are seeking true freedom, and probably is a great lesson for those who are still content with the old, tired, worn out, threadbare rug of bondage that is masquerading as freedom in so many ways. So in society and religion, that's one of those things you're going to want to get behind you, as Jesus said. So, I mean, that's discrimination at the best, so we would sing about that. Guru Rangari Yuktai Swavatmanam Dadau Parikshanantaram Bahu Prashnair Brisham Vishudai Sevanair Bafanstam Pipriye Viveka Nandate Prabhate Patanjali Narendra Shashave Narendra Yavane Narendra Kridane Narendra Shikshane Narendra Palane Narendra Yarpane Viveka Nandate Prabhate Patanjali Viveka Nandate Prabhate Patanjali. In this stotram, written by one of the Swamis of the Ramakrishna order, this verse is for the good of the world and as an example of discrimination, which he named himself after. You scrutinized your guru with thorough questioning and close observation. After assessing the perfect qualities of the Paramahamsa and finding him to be of unsurpassed realization, you reverently offered yourself at his lotus feet, pleasing him with your pure and devoted service. In this auspicious dawn of illumination, O Swami Vivekananda, we offer you our profuse salutations. And the verses, 13 of them, go on like that. We know this, of course, you can see this on YouTube. It's one of the Jaima Music SRV YouTube musical offerings. So this is why we pause to pay reverence to Swami Vivekananda here on his, the eve of his Mahasamadhi day tomorrow. I didn't get very far in Vedavyasa's quote, did I? So he says, the changing tide of the mind's thoughts move towards two distinct oceans. Isn't that well put? The changing mind tides of the mind's thoughts, not the Atman, his soul. That doesn't change, it's witness. The changing tides of the mind's thoughts move towards two distinct oceans. The ocean of freedom, Kaivalya, and the ocean of bondage, samsara. The river of Viveka flows into the former. The river of aviveka flows into the latter. So the discriminating souls go to freedom. The indiscriminate ones go to bondage again. When the latter river is dammed up by the practice of Viveka, Vairagya, and Abhyasa, access to the ocean of Klaivalya is attained. These three qualities ensure nirodha of the vrittis. So you can see this is Vedavyas, the father of Vedanta, commenting on Patanjali's 8-limb system. Otherwise he wouldn't have brought up nirodha of the vrittis. But he's also commenting, as it were, on Lord Kapil's Samkhya Yoga, isn't he, by mentioning the two pragbaras. So anyway, this is how I am interpreting, and I hope it's correct and acceptable to the great souls of what this dam means, because pragbara does mean a dam, so you could go in different directions trying to understand that. But I would say that this natural river of freedom that's open to all souls is getting dammed up because they're not using their discrimination, viveka, and instead they're falling into aviveka, and they're not detaching from the unreal once they see it. Like, say, maybe an advanced practitioner or a philosopher who has studied but not realized the truth yet, or a scientist who knows the secrets of the physical universe but has no inkling of the three worlds that we just looked at. And also, they're not steady once they get this discrimination and detachment. They have to remain steady in that. In this world, it's very important that you're going to have to do that. So that will dam up this river, free-flowing river, into that beautiful world. Beautiful world, yes, but beautiful word, Kaivalya. It's just a beautiful Sanskrit word. So there you see it laid out better for you. Let's look at the samsara pragbara on the right first. The ocean of transmigration, I've called it. It's because of desire for worlds. That's one of the problems your ancestors have. And whether they know it or not, they're coming back. And they want you as their mother and father next time, or sister and brother, and so forth. And so that's going to occur to families. Sri Ramakrishna said, families, like whales, are like born into pods. So they'll be together over a series of lifetimes, these families, switching off their roles, switching off their gender, switching off their countries. All of that is the incidentals of the process of rebirth, death and rebirth, the bardos, as the Tibetan Buddhists call it. But desire is going to be at the force underlying that. They still want wealth, they still want lands, they still want everything except the desire to live a spiritual life. That's one thing they're Xing out of the equation. Oh, I don't think I'll go there this time. I just want to enjoy the world. Big mistake, as they say. Attachment to the sense objects, bondage to nature, and worldly transmigration. Rebirth is basically on this side of that spit of land that's called samsara pragbara. Across the way, what is the most fortunate and grateful devotee of the Lord and seeker of truth have? They have discrimination, dispassion, spiritual practice, steadiness in stillness, and freedom, all on their minds. You might as well say they're already insured of this, and they think this way. That's where my destination is. I know where I came from. It wasn't from nature. I did not take birth in the world. The world took birth in me. I did not come out of nature. Nature came out of me. Everything that you've learned is ass backwards nowadays. Ass backwards. In Indian philosophy, it's put face forward. So don't have your ass look like your face anymore. Get on the stick, see, and take these teachings, enlighten your mind, and be free, like the seers are doing and have done for time out of mind. So the mind is going to be very important, Holy Mother says, for that to happen. It's you use the mind to get to Brahman. You can't just jump there up a bunch of steps like the pseudo-advaitists are doing nowadays by not doing any practice. Yes, you're Atman. No, you haven't realized it yet. You can't realize Atman, you see, until you practice realizing Atman, until you come to know you're the Atman. Upanishads say those who say they know not. So you must come to know that you know. And this has to be corroborated by your guru, by the seers, by the scriptures, and by your sangha, by the way, that you grow in. You all support each other this way. We've already looked at this. Well, what else could I put on a chart like this that wasn't already explanatory in terms of these two oceans that people are finding themselves either caught in or free in, is these 5 aids to sthiti, because I added that at the very end. Good we get to go through this chart because we haven't gone through it for a coon's age, as expressions goes. So sthiti means steadiness, and the Father of Yoga said this is based on utsaha, enthusiasm. I was just talking about that. You must have enthusiasm for the path. But it's going to get clouded unless you restrain the senses, because they're enthusiastic about something other than what's good for you. In most cases, like a child, right? And we have to restrain the senses, wait a while, see, and then, I have inner senses, and so forth. The inner journey begins. So these are the 5 aids to steadiness. If you want to know what steadiness is, leading to peace of mind, this is how the Father of Yoga says it. And I think he got it from Kapila. So sahasa, courage to accomplish the undertaking fully. What undertaking? First of all, the undertaking to get the will to live a spiritual life. There's not a day must go by that you don't do your practice. There's not a minute that will go by that you shouldn't remember Brahman. There's not a second that goes by that you shouldn't breathe in the Divine Mother. And that should be your modus operandi, that should be your background consciousness, that should be everything to you. And then you can live in that, more and more in that non-dual state that I found my teacher in, Swami Vivekananda Maharaj. Peace and bliss be upon him. The third one here is dharya, steadfastness mixed with abiding patience. That's a nice combination. Fourth is adhyatma vidya, pursuit of wisdom, leading to, quote, God is real, the world is unreal. I was just writing to someone today in Europe. He asked me a good question. He said, 16 yogas, it's 18 yogas in the Bhagavad Gita, 18 chapters. So then there's the 4 yogas we know about. So I'm getting confused here, he said. Are those 4 yogas there somewhere in the Gita? Like, sometimes I see there's like a yoga on one thing and then on the other. But I'm trying to find out how these go together. I said, well, at the end of the Gita, there's Sri Krishna teaching those 4 yogas. Chaturdasya Vidya, he calls it. Chaturdasya Yoga. So there's the 4 great yogas have been there since time immemorial. And then how do you take these new teachings of the new religion of the age by Swami Vivekananda and look at the jnana, the bhakti, the meditation, dhyanam, and karma, the service, that all of those are sprinkled like seasoning throughout all 18 of those chapters. And then you'll know that all 4 of these yogas are inherent in all those other yogas. Like chapter 6, Dhyan Yoga, is a yoga on meditation, right? So there's no other mention of meditation in the other 17 chapters as a separate practice, but it's all inherent there. And you read the Gita and it says, well, you concentrate on me and so forth. That's meditation. You're just not quite seeing it. But if you're looking to try and match 4 to 18, you should probably start to look about Samanvaya, how to connect all of these and see where they show up in each chapter of the Gita or in each sloka of the Upanishad. where are these showing up? Oh, he's talking about bhakti right now. Oh, he's talking about service right now. And see how all of that is important to the whole look at yoga. All right, so Mahaseva is fifth and last. Service of the great ones. It's in three parts. Prostrate before them, ask them questions, serve their needs and their person. So basically that could say, Om Tad Vidhi Pranipatena Pariparshena Sevaya Upadekshanti Te Jnana Jnaninas Tatvadarshanaha. That's what I was just talking about in the Gita. So all of these are there in one sloka in one of the chapters. You prostrate before them, you ask them questions about the nature of your true self, and you serve them. That Mahaseva is there. So that's three things in one sloka, in one chapter, under the heading of 4 yogas, you see. I mean, what are prostrating we'd say would be devotion, asking them questions, wisdom, serving their needs, service, karma, isn't it? So you can see how it's just like flavoring sprinkled into every one of those utterances of these divine beings, like this sort of discrimination chart we just saw, where I took 8 different great souls to talk about what the sword meant. The awareness of steadiness is aided by ekagrata, one-pointed devotion to the self. The Paramatman, whose nature is essential consciousness. So how Patanjali talks about steadiness, the attainment of it is going to be aided by this knowledge of that thou art. I am the Atman, ever free, never bound. That self and I am I, none else exists, and thou art that, as Vivekananda puts it in his Song of the Sannyasin. So that takes us through the discrimination platform. In the minutes remaining, the next thing that we would walk to inwardly, that is, of course, is the direct perception of the Atman, how to abide in meditation. And for that, in such a few minutes of time, we might have to pick that up in the next class, because I wanted to show you the seated samadhis of Patanjali in that regard, because that's going to cover actually both meditation and samadhi. Flash it at you right now, so you all just be chomping at the bit for next Sunday's class. And you can see there that wisdom samadhi, sampragyata, is of 4 kinds, but the ultimate non-dual samadhi is just one. The 4 kinds are seated, because they still have some connection to names, forms, time, space, teachings, knowledge, and so forth. But that asampragyata is a seedless samadhi. As Sri Ramakrishna said, the seeds have all been, in the mind, have all been burnt, the seed thoughts, by the fire of wisdom. So they can't germinate anymore. And so that's how Sri Ramakrishna summates the great teachings of the Father of Yoga, some 1,200 years later. A mere nothing, a snap in time, you see. And we'll look at that, and we'll then move on in the final class, as I was saying, to giving you some deeper look on these challenges of how to master a spiritual life, master the will to live a spiritual life, and these victories you gain that we went through already. That's going to be very important to flesh those out more and see what we can finish up then this whole thing. This will take us into the union with Brahman category, and we can conclude our 4-class series with that. So thank you all for being on hand with us. See you next Sunday for more on this profound and important subject. Om Brahmanandam Shivam Shantam Premarupam Niranjanam Yogisham Adbhutam Nityam Akhandadvaita Lakshanam Vijnanam Trigunatitam Turyabeda Samgitam Subodham Sharadam Chaiva Viveka Shashi Bhushanam Samanvaya Mahacharya Yugadharma Swarupinam Sarvadeva Swarupam Shri Ramakrishna Namamyaham. Om Shantihi, Shantihi, Shantihi. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat.